Bombshell testimony just released undercutting Donald Trump's core impeachment defense. The investigation also drawing closer to the top of Trump's inner circle. Newly released testimony shows two witnesses pointing the finger at Mick Mulvaney, chief of staff, a witness with firsthand knowledge of the now infamous phone call between Trump and the leader of Ukraine, the Army officer Alexander Vindman, who also is at the White House as a staffer, who also has a Purple Heart. Well, he's testifying now in what we're seeing in detail, that the entire plan was to dangle the Trump-Zelensky meeting as a way to get Ukraine to do the political investigations into Biden, and that it was cooked up by Mulvaney. Vindman testifying that there was a conversation with Mulvaney, and this is what was required in order to get a meeting. They had to deliver an investigation. Vindman saying the bribery was explicit, no ambiguity. According to other testimony released today, this from another National Security Council official, Fiona Hill, Mulvaney also was all up in the negotiation. Sondland repeatedly saying he was meeting with Mulvaney and that they already had an arrangement for the big meeting to be worked out with, guess who? Mulvaney. Hill says that she was shocked by all of this and the bribery was blatant, as mentioned, adding that seeing the president undermine national security was basically fulfilling some of her worst fears and nightmares. Mick Mulvaney, who is, of course, the person who stepped to that podium and committed the full Mulvaney and then took it back, he is clearly a central figure in this whole impeachment probe. He contradicted what Donald Trump had been saying up to that point about the infamous call.
There was no quid pro quo. There was nothing.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that.
There was no quid pro quo at all.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo.
We do that all the time with foreign policy.
There was no quid pro quo, unlike Biden.
That's it. And that's why we held up the money.
To paraphrase a famous saying, the fact checks are coming from inside the White House. Now, that's a lot of heat on Mick Mulvaney, who's already pulled the full Mulvaney, walked it back, and is under demand to appear to explain all this. By the way, you kind of hurt your privilege claims when you go out and do big press conferences about the stuff that you might later argue is executive privilege. But Mulvaney, a no-show before Congress. Impeachment investigators say that today he informed them literally, quote, 1 minute before he was due to testify that the White House had ordered him formally not to appear. Meanwhile, Ms. Hill says that she spoke with her supervisor, remember John Bolton, who told her the Biden investigation should not be any part of this whole discussion and told her to report what she was hearing about this bribery plot to the actual lawyer who deals with these things, John Eisenberg, and also to tell him that I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney, there's that staffer again, Mulvaney, are cooking up on this. Now, Congress wants to talk to Bolton as he is a key witness about what went down both before and after this now infamous phone call at the heart of the impeachment probe. Bolton's own lawyer adding today that Bolton knows about all sorts of, quote, relevant meetings on Ukraine. It's a lot, and I want to get right to our power panel on this Friday night. Mark Thompson, host of the Make It Plain podcast. Tony Schwartz, co-author of The Art of the Deal and The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And we are so excited to have back on our program Peggy Noonan, former speechwriter for President Reagan, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and many more things. Nice to see all of you.
Hello, Ari. Good to be here.
If I sound more excited about Peggy than you, she's a first among equals. I'm not picking favorites.
And I'll defer as well.
Peggy, you've been inside a White House that also battled all sorts of questions about, at times, foreign policy, who was doing what, how high did it go. When you see this barrage of pressure, particularly on the chief of staff, what do you think comes next?
Well, of course, the big thing that comes next is the hearings that will sort of orient us by making all of this public in terms of people coming forward. You get to know their name, their face, who they are. As someone who's been in a White House, you can't help but wonder if, in this case, somebody isn't being set up for a fall. You know, when White Houses get in trouble, sometimes they have a way of spontaneously deciding who caused the trouble on the inside and offering them up as sacrificial lambs. So I wonder if we're not seeing a little bit of this Peggy, with Mr. Mulvaney.
To paraphrase the final episode of Succession on HBO this year, there may need to be a blood sacrifice.
Yes. I think White Houses sometimes inevitably think that way. Oh, heck, human beings and organizations will sometimes feel that way. But I'll tell you what, one of the things that I think is happening here, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but on some level, I'm losing track of all of the actors in the drama. Are you finding that at all? There's a colonel coming forward, there's a former ambassador, there's a current ambassador, there's an under ambassador. At a certain point, these things get a little blurry. I am hoping that in the public hearings, things will become more definite and more clear, and the meaning of what is being said be very vivid to everybody.
Well, I think there are two tracks here. I think there's the actual set of facts. If you look at the set of facts, it's as if we're having the Thanksgiving parade and Trump has gotten onto Fifth Avenue and he has literally shot a series of people in cold blood. And all those people who've been testifying.
Are the parade floats okay?
The parade floats have stayed intact.
Okay.
Yeah. But a lot of people have died and a lot of people were there to witness it. And it was very clear what happened. So it's an open and shut case at this point. The second track, however, is that surrounding those eyewitnesses are Trump supporters who he accurately said, and continues to be the case, would ignore it if I shot people on Fifth Avenue. I mean, we see that even with his biggest enablers, with people like Lindsey Graham, where they'll say things that are so preposterously untrue that unless you want to live in an altered reality, there's no way to take them seriously.
Well, so let's play out the parade, and I'm going to come back to Peggy. I'm not a body language expert, but I did note some potential dissent with that view. So we'll come back to you. But to Mark, if that is the case, if the difference between this and other controversies may be that, as we just showed, Mick Mulvaney won't talk to Congress to say the thing that he already said in public, which is we do it all the time. What then is the priority for the impeachment investigation to do something credible, to provide due process style rights to everyone, but also to move ahead with telling the country what they think they found occurred?
Well, I think they've indicated that they don't want to haggle in the courts about people denying subpoenas. Plus, is it that big of a deal if Mulvaney shows up or not? Because he actually said it on television what already happened. In terms of the blurriness, yeah, it can be overwhelming. The average person probably can't keep up with all the names. But what's not blurry is that they're all corroborating the same story. The White House is obsessed over two deep throats. Nixon had one. You have anonymous and you have a whistleblower. That's two deep throats. But they don't even matter anymore because so many people publicly, and we even learned from more of the transcripts today, Vindman, Hill, Taylor, Sondland, all of them have said the same thing. So it really doesn't even matter who the whistleblower is anymore. It doesn't matter who anonymous is. And it really also doesn't make that big of a deal, make that much of a difference if Mulvaney shows up or not.
Well,
Trump has also said it.
Let me jump in and say, I have good news and good news. The good news is, if you're thinking that there are a lot of different pieces to this, we have a breakdown later in this show that very clearly shows who are the witnesses to watch. The other good news is, before I bring in some more of the testimony, which I want to report on, I give Ms. Noonan the promised rebuttal time.
It's not a rebuttal. I was thinking as Tony was speaking, both of these things which seem opposites are true. One is with the movement and action of people going in and testifying and all that stuff, with a lot of pieces to this puzzle, with a lot of actors in the drama, there's a certain amount of blur that is happening. But there's something else that's happening, and it is going to be part of the challenge for the hearings next week. It is that the hearings are dedicated to proving something that I think most American observers who are watching closely don't even doubt. I don't happen to think Republicans and Democrats are in deep disagreement on whether or not the President of the United States, in a phone call, but also in other ways, was muscling the President of Ukraine to give him a political gift that he desired, and what the President of Ukraine would get in return for that would be previously congressionally authorized funds. The check would be cut.
This is sorry.
I have to tell you,
You got him excited.
This
that isn't hard.
I just think this is kind of clear to people. For instance, when this whole story broke with the whistleblower, nobody who supported the president, nobody in the White House, nobody in Congress came forward and said, that doesn't sound like the president. The president would never do that.
Exactly.
That never happened.
Right,
Nobody
right.
said that because everybody who loves Trump thought, yeah, he'd do that. And those who don't like Trump thought, yeah, he'd do that.
And that speaks to what many people see as the debasement of the office of the presidency by this individual, which is not a dismissal of all of his supporters or all of his ideas. But it is funny
Absolutely.
and it is funny and sad that Peggy says something that I think everyone can relate to, which is a lot of folks went, yep, that sounds like our president.
Yeah,
Of
but the
course.
sad part to me, I mean, Trump is just one guy, and Trump is, at some point, Trump's going to be out of here. But the fact that 40+% of Americans, in the face of, and I completely agree, they know that he's guilty, and this is the key thing, they don't care. They don't care. Do whatever you want to do. Now, that's not a logical, deductive decision. That is an emotion. And that emotion has completely overwhelmed 40% of America.
I'd like to be more optimistic about that. And I know why you're saying that. I mean, some of the numbers have shown that. But I think Tuesday gives us some sign of optimism that there aren't as many people who are willing just to give him that free pass and say it's okay if you shoot somebody or threaten the president from another country. That remains to be seen. We'll see about a year from now. As far as the blurriness, I think the public testimony helps that because starting next week, we'll be able to put faces with
Yes.
names, and there's no
Yeah.
substitute for people seeing personalities and sincerity and all of that. So, you know, I think that helps.
Well,
as well.
and you talk about the personalities. Many of them, as we've emphasized in our reporting, are Trump people, Trump loyalists, Trump appointees. John Bolton is a hawk's hawk.
Right.
If he were any more of a hawk, he would literally take flight.
And if he does this, being the hawk that he is, he's an established part of that wing.
Yeah.
If he comes forward and says this on top of everybody else, that's pretty damning. You know, Nixon had one say is a cancer on the presidency, but you have the potential of a whole lot of people.
Well, we were
saying
talking about this
there's
in
a
the
cancer on the
newsroom
presidency.
today. We were talking about, and we don't know whether John Bolton may turn out to be a John Dean type figure or something else.
We are
because
not
John
sure.
Bolton has a muscular view of presidential powers and may say, mistake, yes, impeachable, not so sure. What I want to do is all of you stay. But one thing we try to do is parcel it out here. And so there's one more piece of news I want to get your reaction on. This is all about Sondland, who, like Bolton, is a Trump person. Fiona Hill saying that Sondland, the Trump donor, told her, quote, he was in charge of Ukraine. And she said, on whose authority? He said, the president. This is now impeachment evidence because of everything that went down. Hill also saying she saw Sondland as a target for foreign powers, basically telling me I can get you into the White House. All this comes as Sondland makes the bombshell reversal on his own testimony just this week. He started by defending the president, but ultimately conceded the bribery plot, saying he told Ukraine no U.S. aid money without the investigation Trump wanted. And that brings us up to what we were just talking about. Is it blurry? Are there lies? Well, Donald Trump backing away, as he's done with other people who have served him up to a point. Because look at this. Donald Trump recently describing Sondland as someone he knew to be a good man and a great American. And now all of a sudden today he says this.
Let me just tell you, I hardly know the gentleman, but this is the man who said there was no quid pro quo. And he still says that. And he said that I said that. And he hasn't changed that testimony.
Tony, this is the person that you wrote The Art of the Deal with. This is a person who will extract what he can from people and then say with a straight face, I hardly know them and they're the worst.
I lie for a living. I mean, it comes to him. He can't tell the truth. He's almost literally at this point incapable of telling the truth. What happens with Trump is that anything that arises that in any way alters his self-image, he will reactively come up with something from thin air. And now we have 13,000 lies, but I'd like to know how many truths we have. How many times has he told the truth during the last 3 years?
You think we should start counting that?
I do, because it's an easier count. You could do it on one or two hands, and they were accidental.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a time he has told the truth. What I've noticed, though, is, and I wonder if you found this to be true, too, that he has to resort. He's like a child, and David K. Johnston wrote about that. He's still the child that his parents dropped off in military school, and it's like he never grew up out of that. So he has to attack people personally. That's why he's so fascinated with getting names. And then if he can't attack you personally, he says he doesn't even know who you are. I mean, that's to me just an immature way of functioning. He knows the situations that he's in, so either he's going to call somebody a bunch of names, or he's going to say, I've never met him, I don't know who it is. And it just doesn't dawn on him. You know, one of the worst things a human being can be is non-self-aware. And this is probably one of the most non-self-aware individuals in human history.
But, you know, those who feel passionately supportive of the president do not think that his enemies are necessarily truthful people, that his enemies are going at him for high-minded reasons having to do with protecting the public good. They think his enemies are going after him for merely partisan, low political reasons. And so this,
what do you think?
This thing becomes a big punch. Do you know what I mean?
What do you think?
I think that this is an unusual president who has done what John Kelly, his former chief of staff, told him he would do if he didn't clean up his act, which is summon through his actions an impeachment movement in the Congress. But I don't think it does us any good to make believe that the president is the only one who ever does some wrong here. I think his enemies have sometimes, to tell you the truth, I think in Congress, there are a lot of people who have, in their rage and sometimes in their mischief towards the president, given their own case kind of a bad look to at least half the country.
Can I ask
For instance, Adam Schiff looks like a partisan guy.
He is partisan.
Okay, well.
What do you mean he looks
my
like?
goodness.
He is partisan. He's a Democrat.
Well, I understand that. But, you know, you have to run something like this, an impeachment proceeding, in a way like Peter Rodino ran Watergate when he was the head of judiciary. He did it in a very careful way that included Republicans, he kind of put his arms around them. He wound up getting a lot of Republican support for the articles of impeachment that he supported.
But those are different Republicans.
Exactly. This is a different time.
They've been in the hearings, Ms. Noonan.
You have to do this. You have to be the Rodino character.
But he's a pretty monotone character,
not just with a sense of
isn't he?
passion, but with a sense of sadness about this thing we're in.
But Congressman Schiff, I'm sorry, is a pretty, I mean, he's a pretty straightforward, non-emotional, monotone character. I don't think you can get more colorless than that.
And I have to fit in a break because of the things that are coming up. I really appreciate the seriousness that you each are dialoguing with each other. There's a lot of monologue and there's a lot of noise, quite frankly. This was a dialogue. And for anyone at home listening who heard something and thought, I disagree with that, good, because there was more than one view on this panel, so you couldn't possibly agree with all of it. It's a nice way to start the weekend during tumultuous times. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.